Request you all to please take your seats. We are going to start within 3 minutes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Wish you all a very warm welcome to the first edition of our annual conference, Millennial Learning, Educational Strategies for the Next Generation, organized by the Education Committee of the Bengal Chamber, under the leadership of Dr. Suborno Bose, Chairman, Education Committee, and Mr. Shottam Rai Chaudhary, Vice Chairperson, Education Committee. Before we start, we would like to thank our presenting partner of this today's conference, Sister Nivedita University, our powered by sponsor, IIHM, our associate sponsors, Bandhan Bank, Calcutta Business School, International Combustion, Heritage, SICOM Skills University, Om Dayal Group of Institution, and a very senior member of our Education Committee. Without further ado, I would request Dr. Suborno Bose and Mr. Indrajit Sen, President-designate of the Bengal Chamber, to escort our chief guest, Dr. Anil Sahasrabuddhe, Chairman, All India Council for Technical Education, to be on the dais. We are very much thankful to Sahasrabuddhe sir for his kind acceptance. May I now request our Vice Chairperson, Mr. Shottam Rai Chaudhary, to escort Professor Dr. Ranjan Saxena, Vice Chancellor NMIMS, and also to welcome Mr. Bruce Bucknell, British Deputy High Commissioner. May I request Mr. Indrajit Sen to welcome Ms. Leonie Muldoon, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, Austrade, and Dr. Ashok Thakur, Chief Mentor and Advisor, Sister Nivedita University, to be on the dais. Thank you, dignitaries on the dais. Following the tradition of Indian culture, today's conference, we will begin with a lamp lighting session. I would request my dignitaries on the dais, my chairman, my president-designate, to please come up for the lamp lighting session. I would also request Mr. P.R. Agarwal from Heritage Group, Dr. Anup from Om Dayal Group, to join us for the lamp lighting ceremony, along with the members of my Education Committee, Mrs. Suman Sood, Ms. Pratati Bhattacharya, Mr. Moloy Dotto, Mr. Anish Chakraborty, and all other members who are present here. Ms. Rupkotha Sarkar, yes, there she is. Can we request you all to please stand in a line for a photo opportunity, please? My photographer friends are requested to please take their photographs. Thank you. May we now request our dignitaries to join the stage and request all to take your seats. I would now request our President-designate Mr. Indrajit Sen to give a formal welcome address.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also on behalf of Dr. Subarna Bose, Chairman, Education Committee, and Mr. Shottam Rai Chaudhuri, Vice Chairman, Education Committee of the Chamber, I welcome you all to this education conclave on millennial learning and education strategies for the next generation. It is indeed a pleasure to have you with us today. Through ages, starting from the days when knowledge was transferred through words of mouth to the current age of internet and analytics, the boundaries of knowledge as well as the transfer of knowledge, which is learning, has undergone such transformation which is truly beyond comprehension and any measurement. The knowledge is continually expanding, like expanding universe, and the learning has also been keeping pace through development of newer technology. Today's deliberation concerns the learning of the millennials, who are also known as Generation Y. This is the generation which follows Generation X and are the young people who were born between early 1980s till year 2000, and many of whom are currently passing through the various stages of learning. It also needs to be appreciated that there is a vast difference between literacy and education, and in the words of Henry Ford, the object of education is not to fill a man's mind with facts, it is to teach him how to use his mind in thinking. Literacy is defined as the ability to read, write, and understand the basic facts, whereas education works on a broader canvas and on a much deeper level, making it possible for the persons to think comprehensively, reasonably, and scientifically, to be gainfully integrated and contribute to the society at large. With the cascading inflow of knowledge through technology available today, there shall always be a temptation to bypass the concept of education and stay at the literacy level with its limited and narrow objectives. This surely is undesirable and a challenge for the educationists and the social scientists. In this scenario, the education of the millennials require a major change in the strategy, which also needs to be addressed on priority, keeping in view the vast source of knowledge available and the possibility of smart use of technology. The various aspects of such education and challenges would surely be addressed by the eminent personalities, scholars, and speakers who shall deliberate on the education strategy for the next generation at this education conclave. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Anil Sahasrabudhe, Chairman All India Council of Technical Education, Professor Ranjan Saxena, Vice Chancellor NMIMS, Mr. Bruce Bucknell, British Deputy High Commissioner, Kolkata, Mrs. Leonie Muldoon, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, Australia Trade and Investment Commission, Dr. Ashok Thakur, Chief Mentor and Advisor, Sister Nivedita University. Madam and gentlemen, we feel privileged to have you with us here today. With this, I would request Dr. Subarna Bose to take this forward, and thank you very much for being present here. Thank you.
A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, dignitaries on the dais, invitees, friends from the Bengal Chamber, and all my colleagues in the Education Committee. First of all, warm welcome to what's going to be an absolutely fantastic day of deliberations on the future of education. So just to take what President Indrajit Das said about education and literacy, that reminds me of a very famous quote by Mahatma Gandhi, who said that literacy is not the end of education, it's not even the beginning. So today we are going to talk more on education and less of literacy. So we all know that we have got climate crisis, we have got so much of crisis, but I think we have also got another big crisis. It's not just about natural resources, I think it's also about human resources. I think globally, and more so in our country, we are going through a period of huge crisis in the human resources. So just like any other crisis, this is another kind of crisis where people are doing job which they don't enjoy, and sometimes we have to do some jobs which are not the kind of passion that we can do. However, there are two kinds of people, and the second kind do job which really they love, and they really are doing incredible job, but they are in the minority. So we always wondered what's going wrong, and I think today with so many eminent speakers, we will get an answer, some kind of a process about where we are going, where we are wrong. Is it because of the socio-economic pressure? Is it because that we need to earn money by whatever way? Is it not we are sacrificing our natural talent for traditional education? So I'm sure that today we'll hear a lot about it and more. What we need today is a little bit of a revolution in education. It has to be transformed into something else, possibly something more innovative, something that doesn't conform to the set norms and beliefs that we have nurtured or maintained all our life. Most of us, we think today are concepts which are made in the past, and we had gone through this concept. But today's children are made of a different genre. They are from the digital age. They are the natives of the internet. We are the immigrants. So their life should be taken in that context. Today's children's entire concept is based on a learning which should be akin to what they feel is right. I think what we have done also is that we have taken the entire education system on a linear basis, that you start here, you go there. I think what we need to do is to get into a more organic level, a more organic system of education where people can do what they like to do, but at the same time, the socio-economic factor needs to be considered. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's my great privilege to have all of you here and a panel, a galaxy of speakers from education, not just from India, but from United Kingdom, from Australia, and of course some very eminent speaker. So we are going to hear some very, very interesting ideas about education, the future of education, and how, as educational entrepreneurs who are here in this room, can look at the future of education. Because the future of education is the future of our children, and it is something which is extremely important for each one of us. So thank you once again for joining us, and may I now request our next speaker for the keynote address, the chairman of AICT, Mr. Anil Shashabati, to come and please take the microphone from me and deliver the keynote address. Very, very warm welcome, sir. Thank you. And on behalf of Bengal Chamber of Commerce, it's a very warm welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, sorry, yes.
It can be a musical chair, and whoever is missing, can occupy that. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think I'm very thankful to Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industries for inviting me here on the occasion of this very important one-day, we call workshop, seminar, interaction meeting on Millennium learning education strategies for the next generation. I think everyone is talking about education because it's very fundamental and very important for everyone. Every citizenry wants to have education. And since I am here in Bengal, I remember the great sage Swami Vivekananda, who said education is the manifestation of perfection already in man. I'm saying our education needs to really unearth the talent that exists. Everyone may not be good in math, someone may be good in history, someone may be good in something. So I think we need to unearth what is perfection already in man, and that's what is education. And it is not just true in the 19th century when he enunciated this, but it was true earlier. It is going to be true in the 21st century and beyond. And therefore, we must pay our reverence to Swamiji and then begin. When we talk about education, three important things come to mind. One is starting of the educational institutions in different domains, their sustenance, and then if they're not performing, then taking them off. There are three important things. And I correlate with our Hindu mythology, where we talk about Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. Brahma, the creator. Our educational institutions are created earlier by only government, and today by lots of private enterprises, industries, people who are passionate about education. They are creating educational institutions. They are all our Brahmas, whether it is government or the private bodies, self-financed institutions. For sustenance, sometimes you require governmental support for government institutions. For self-sustaining, for private and self-financing institutions, there is a fee to be charged. There is an industry body which can help them through its CSR activities. So this is all for sustenance. And then finally, the role of a regulator is to see that quality is maintained, and if that quality is not maintained, take stringent action in closing, do the role of Mahesha as well. So Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesha are all available in this particular room here. There are people who have created educational institutions who are sustaining that is the industry, and there are regulators who are controlling the quality that is existing. As far as the government goes, for a long time, the three principles which were enunciated for a long time was access, equity, and quality, and for increasing the gross enrollment ratio. When we got independence, our gross enrollment ratio, especially in higher education, was as low as 0.7%, and with constant effort, both by the government and the private bodies, it has reached 25.2%, but still far below not only developed countries, but many developing countries. So many developing countries are at the level of 35–40%. Developed countries have GER of more than 60%, 70%, and therefore we have still a long way to go in order to achieve maybe 50% gross enrollment ratio. But our vision should be that. And with that perspective, access and equity from 0.7% to 25% certainly is a big leap forward. But in the process, whether we have given enough attention to quality, if you ask this question, a lot of question marks are raised. And that's why we need to understand what are those quality parameters and important things in our perspective. Recently, government has added another 3 parameters, that is affordability, then autonomy, and self-declaration and accountability. I think these 3 are also equally important because a large population, 1.3 billion population with 65% below the age of 25, 30 years. So naturally, there are lots of aspirations from the middle class. Everyone wants to get higher education. So the fee charged should be affordable, and therefore there are lots of fee regulatory bodies in every state which do a lot of job in allowing only a limited amount of fee to be charged and so on, so that there is an affordability. The next important thing is autonomy. Many of our universities and our regulators have been stifling the improvement in the system, and therefore there is more autonomy needed to be given to universities. In turn, universities need to give to their affiliated colleges. And so there is a system of what is known as autonomous colleges. One has to take the approval from the University Grants Commission in order to become autonomous. Then you have freedom in having your own curriculum, the way you deliver the curriculum, the way you set your question papers, the evaluation processes, you get full freedom for that. UGC on its part recently declared one of the very breathtaking regulations, which is called as graded autonomy. Institutions which have accreditation level of 3.51 and above are fully free to have variety of all, including fee charging, including the nature of syllabus, starting of the new programs. They don't have to take any approval from UGC. So this is a very important step forward. Then there are next level of institutions called category 2 institutions between NAC accreditation level of 3.26 to 3.51. They have maximum autonomy, but not everything that 3.51 and above enjoy, in terms of including having foreign collaborations, signing off programs for dual degree arrangements. I think variety of possibilities have been opened up. The last variety, those whose accreditation value in terms of score is below 3.26, they have a lot of restrictions, and regulations will play a big role onto those institutions. And therefore, all the institutions should strive to reach from wherever they are to the level of at least 3.26 and beyond, so that they get all autonomy and freedom. And this is very important from the perspective of universities. When it comes to affiliated colleges, in fact, there is a committee report by Mr. Cow committee report on technical education, noted that there have been only few countries, that is 4 countries, that is in the India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, who continue to have the affiliation system, and rest of them have all left it long ago, and they are all fully autonomous. Whereas in our country, for becoming autonomous, there is a long process still involved, and there are lots of bottlenecks. There are instances where institutions are interested in autonomy, but the faculty and staff are not interested in autonomy because they feel the workload will increase. There are institutions who are interested in autonomy, but the university does not want to leave its clutches on to them, and therefore they stifle them in not allowing no objection certificate to be given to them. And on the other side, when the committees come, there is a lot of grilling and there is difficulty in getting it. So one major thrust which we can probably think about is any institution which has achieved an accreditation by either National Board of Accreditation for engineering programs and technical programs, and those who have got NAC accreditation in general colleges, beyond a particular level, should be given autonomy without asking. And if you do that, I think probably more and more institutions will become autonomous. And this is a thinking which is going on in our circles. So if that happens, large number of institutions. Today there are hardly 10 to 15% institutions, and that will easily reach 40 to 45% institutions. So this is another important thing which probably we need to do, and the movement has to be in that direction. The last important part of this is, having given autonomy, accountability is important. So it should be based on self-disclosures and everything that an institution does in terms of the fee being charged, the last date of admission, the refund fee, in terms of what would be the curriculum, who are the faculty members on its roles, what type of curriculum they are offering, what type of examination system they are following. I think everything should be transparently available onto the website so that any student, any stakeholder, parent would love to go to an institution based on the disclosure that is made. And if some institution is not following what they have disclosed, probably stringent measures are required to be taken against such institutions for not following what they have claimed. I think if you do that, probably educational institutions and the general quality of education will improve. This is as far as our country is concerned. But when we are talking about this entire millennial education system, there are many changes and reforms that are desired for improving the quality. And for that, few initiatives which have been taken, I will just narrate first, and then talk about globally what could be achieved. Number one, if we have to have a global outlook and also have global presence, global ranking, like our students go abroad for studies and invite students from different countries to come here and study here, that is Study in India program, we must understand each other. And from this perspective, very interesting program began in the last 1.5 years, which is called GIAN, in short, GIAN, which is Global Initiative of Academic Networks. Under this, any foreign faculty who is interested in coming to India and teach a course for 1 week duration or 2 weeks duration, entire honorarium, travel cost and living expenses are taken care of by the government. For 1 week course, $8,000 are given. For 2 weeks course, $12,000 are given. And this entirely has made so effective that in the last 1.5 years, more than 1,300 faculty members from different parts of the world, from all countries of the world probably, they have come to India and they have taught either a 1 week course or a 2 week course in India. So this is where we can have real interactions beginning to happen between our institutions and the foreign institutions. So this is a very major thrust forward. There's another research program which is very important, which is called Imprint. Of course, it is so far restricted to only IITs and Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, but needs to be expanded to other state universities, public universities, as well as private universities, whereby any interesting, challenging problem which India as well as the globe faces, if we submit that proposal, then 50% funding will come from MHRD and 50% from the relevant government department which would be interested in that problem. For example, Water Resources. Water Resources Ministry will pay 50% of the funding, 50% from MHRD. Similarly, if there is another problem of environment, which is a challenge for not only India, for the entire globe, if that problem is to be solved, half of the contribution will come from that ministry and the government. I think if we do this, naturally, the grand challenges which the world is facing today in terms of water, environment, energy, housing, transportation, security, I think all of those problems which every country in the world is facing would be solved through research and innovation, which is very significant for us as well as for the entire globe. And we can contribute towards that. So this is another very, very major initiative. The third initiative is National Digital Library. Many institutions in remote parts of the country may not have access to excellent library facilities. Today, in a digital world, the library can be at your doorsteps, on your mobile phone, on your PC, or on your laptop. And therefore, this National Digital Library has collection of 17 million documents already on. And anyone can make use of this. This is free of cost, handled by an institution here in West Bengal itself, IIT Kharagpur. So every institution can become a member of that and access this entire information free of cost. You don't have to even go to different resources to collect this information, but it is available at your doorsteps. There are many other initiatives. We at AICT did 3 significant initiatives for improving the quality of education. One of them is National MOOCs platform called Swayam. This has now more than 1,300 courses by the best of the professors in all domains, right from high school, 9th, 10th standard onwards, to undergraduate and postgraduate education in almost all domains. Started mainly with engineering, but has courses on humanities and social sciences. There are courses on arts. There are courses on including music, drama, photography, and so on. So I think anyone who is interested in learning, he can learn anytime, anywhere, from any device. So geographical boundaries, no boundary now. You can learn from anywhere. You can choose your timing. You don't have to, go to the college or somewhere between, say, 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock. You can do it in the evening, night, morning, depending on your choice of timing and on your device. It is mobile or laptop, whatever is available. Only requirement is internet penetration and internet connectivity. I'm very happy that except few small number of villages and districts, internet penetration has been excellent in our country in the last couple of years. So today education is available at doorsteps for everyone. This is about Swayam. Last 2 years we did another experiment as a technical education regulator. We took the role of a facilitator and said we will give what is known as Smart India Hackathon to not just our country but the entire world. So Smart India Hackathon is a concept under which we received problem statements from the government departments and give these problems to our students as challenges, invited their ideas, out-of-the-box solutions, and shortlisted. And those whose ideas were comparatively better on paper, they were all invited in different centers, and simultaneously, by remaining awake for 36 long hours, students solved those problems of the government. Last year it was 598 problems of 28 government departments. This time it was 340 problem statements of 27 government departments of the center and 17 state governments. I think this is an amazing talent hunt for our entire country. Because on one side, industry keeps saying that our students who graduate are not employable, they are not up to the mark. But on the other side, very same students, given an opportunity, given a challenge, are coming forward with out-of-the-box solutions, not even before graduation, much before, second year, third year students. And I'm very happy that last year's prize winners were asked to continue with the problem and give a robust solution which can be implemented by the government. 54 such problems were taken up. I'm very happy that 27 have reached the final destination goal, and the government departments have introduced that as a solution, as an application for the common citizenry. So imagine those students, 27 teams of 6 members each, who did solve these problems, that I'm still not even a graduate, but my solution is being adopted by the government for the betterment of the public life. And this gives immense confidence amongst our students, and this is a very important thing. Last but not the least was, third initiative was of the startups. But we are finding that the jobs in large companies and corporations, both Indian and multinationals, are reducing because of automation, because of new technologies which are emerging. So the number of jobs being less and less in large corporations, there is a big opportunity for small type of activities, small service providers, small product developments, and therefore we must develop a culture of startups from our educational institutions. So in fact, every institution should have an innovation center, an incubator, so that at least 10% of the students, instead of seeking jobs, will take up entrepreneurship as their motto, and at the end of their program, they will give 10 jobs, 20 jobs, rather than seeking jobs. I think this is the third important initiative which has been undertaken. Now coming back to the global scenario, we need to have strong interaction with the entire global community. The best practices that are happening worldwide have to be adopted. New technologies which are emerging, new curricula have to come in our places. We cannot run with the curriculum which was devised 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Our curricula should be the 21st century curricula. Today we have in technical domains, whether it is Internet of Things, whether it is machine learning, deep learning, robotics, this is playing very, very important role in our industry. And if we are not teaching our students all this, I think they are going to be lost. And therefore our curriculum needs to be revised. When curriculum is revised, we need our faculty to be trained, And so either use the MOOCs or first-hand training of our faculty in the best institutions and prepare them for that. So this is the second important thing. The third important thing is prepare our students for lifelong learning. Because technologies which I'm talking about are today. 10 years down the line, something else will come. And students should not say that I do not know this because it was not taught in my college, and then he will become jobless. So training our students to learn on their own and creating a culture of lifelong learning is also important among students. Last but not the least, our industry friends should provide internships for our students so that they know how industry operates right when they are in the colleges and educational institutions. And these are 4 significant things. If we start doing it, I'm sure there will be no dearth for jobs, there will be no dearth for creating innovative products and solutions from our educational institutions, which will go a long way in creating a totally innovative culture. Our country today stands at 60th rank amongst 127 countries in Innovation Index. But if you look on the other side, people who are not even having education, they are providing a lot of jugaad technologies, we call jugaad technology, and they have been able to do so much well without education. But if you really create a right atmosphere in our educational institutions by having innovation labs, providing 24/7 facility for students to come anytime they want, and then whatever their ideas, try to implement them, I'm sure we will become an innovative nation, come within top 10. We have that potential. We just need to use that potential. And with these few words, once again, I thank Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Several initiatives which industry is taking, which government is taking, which various industries and the industry bodies are taking. I'm sure we have bright days ahead of the old times. Nalanda and Takshila is not far. We may be able to achieve that again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shahasra. May I now request Mr. Bruce Bucknell, British Deputy High Commissioner, Kolkata, to deliver a special address.
So thank you very much, Dr. Bose, Mr. Sen of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, especially that last speech, sir, Dr. Forgive my pronunciation, Sahasrabuddhe. Forgive me, I'm not very good on the names. I will come in the spirit of Shiva. There is disruption in the air. It has come from the West. There was Brexit, and there is Trump. So forgive me if what I say is a little bit challenging, but I hope to give some grist to your conversations today. I am not an expert on education or training or skills, but I'm a recipient of it. I'm the parent of 2 20-year-olds who are in the process of getting a very good higher education at university. And therefore, and I'm a current student of that wonderfully named School of Oriental and African Studies. I'm in the middle of doing a master's degree because I know I'm coming towards the end of my diplomatic career. I need to skill up. I need to get myself out there. I need to network. I need to have other skills than those of purely standing up on stages and talking to lots of people about subjects I know very little about. So the challenge is on just as much for me in the 21st century as somebody who can remember when we used to beat India regularly at cricket, as it is on that massive generation, Generation Y, Millennials, whatever they are, because we all face the same challenges. And sir, you said very eloquently, and I whatever I say now, the things that you've said I can't beat. The lifelong learning, that is me. Learning on websites, thinking about startups. We have to start up our own careers, actually. And of course, and I've purposely today brought the laptop, not the pieces of paper, using that modern technology as the aid to the speech. So in my spirit of Shiva, and to tease you all, because that's sort of my role in life, or certainly here. I'm the bald Emperor of Bengal, be warned. I'm going to say, I'll make 3 sort of observations. I'll sort of riff on them, and I will do 3 infomercials. I have to, I'm British. I'm a representative outside, which I think are global, but which I think are relevant, very relevant to the conversation today. The first observation, training, skills, education, the whole thing. And aside from that wonderful education that we are particularly good at in Britain, and actually you're pretty good in India too, the very top elite education, the IITs, certain universities, which I shall not name today, Oxford and Cambridge, there are only relatively few people who get to them. Most of the education should be for the masses. There's a little bit of a Bengali spin in the middle of that. For that education, employers should drive the training, the skills, and the education that you receive. Now, I'm working on the basis that most of the people in the hall are employers of one sort or another. I suspect a lot of you are education providers. So I hope that I've complied with the first rule of diplomacy, which is to ingratiate yourself with the audience. But it is so easy to say that and very difficult to achieve. What does it mean that employers should drive education? They're busy running their companies. They don't know what they need in a week's time sometimes, but they know they want people with the core skills. And we should not forget literacy and numeracy. David is going to speak to you later. There is a constant refrain. It may be a mere slogan of that wonderful media we have in Britain to cane our education system, that employers are constantly being reported to say we have job applicants who can neither read nor write nor add up. I don't know if it's true or not, but don't forget the core skills. There are also the core skills of employability. What you want from your employers. You want the number one, you want them to turn up to work, if you're in Britain and Germany, on time, every day that you are working except their holidays. You want them to work with their colleagues. You want them to be able to communicate. You want all those little skills that make people actually work. I think the other, I will come back, I'll do the infomercial at the end. You also want, in the modern world, because it's a fact of life, you want a little bit more enterprise. You want people who can problem solve. You need people who understand profit and loss, who can network. That is the modern world we live in, because they'll spend half their day on their phone at work. They will even spend half their time at a conference on their phone networking. That is the world we live in, the constant connectedness. And you want people who come and work for you, who when they're on that phone, when they're in the workplace, actually doing that will benefit your company and not their individual careers. And then last but not least, of course, you still want all those skills that we've talked about. And actually, and I'll come on to this, many of those skills will be unchanged. But yes, you're absolutely right, sir. The world is changing, the technology is changing. The infomercial that I will make is that please think about, and sir, I do not know enough about your system here in India, nor do I know, David, enough about our system in Britain. We have this very bad tendency in Britain to create an institution and 3 years later rename it, rebrand it, relaunch it according to which political party is running the country. It is a terrible short-term disease. Thankfully, the world is moving on at such a rate that it's not such a problem as it used to be, because you can go on the internet and work out what is happening in Britain. But the one most important thing I would say to you, and I don't know if you have them in India, we have this wonderful organization called Skills Training UK. Skills Training UK, is that right, David? Which is, if you like, the docking point for employers, people who give the jobs, people who need the skills with educational institutions. You can cross-examine David later to ask how effective they are. Sorry, David. The second observation. Despite all the technology, many traditional jobs aren't going away. Now that seems slightly counterintuitive, but let us not get overswept up by the hype of all those coders based in Bangalore, Palo Alto, the London cluster, Berlin, God knows where in China and Russia. Most of the jobs that are current in the economy are still going to be there in 10 years' time. Now, of course, the challenge is your car mechanic in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time is going to be dealing and maintaining a car that is very different, or is likely to be different if the technology gets there, to the car that is on our roads today. I'm taking all of this from a report that my British Council colleagues made. I'm sorry for the infomercial, but here it is. The Overview of India's Evolving Skill Development Landscape. I hope you're aware of it, sir. It is that 4 clusters of skills that I mentioned before that was outlined. And the research, and of course what research has been made today may, I confess, be out of date in a year or so's time, but the big numbers of jobs are still going to be in the maintenance of all the things that make our lives easier, be they cars, be they buildings we live in, be they the food that we eat and how it is processed, be it the healthcare, be it the plumbing, the electricity, and all the services that we have coming through into our house, into our office. Those jobs are not going away. We may need a fewer of them, but in the great Internet of Things, if the Internet fails, or there is a mechanical failure in the thing, or an electrical failure in the thing, you will still need somebody to come and repair and look after it. That's a little bit of grist to the mill. Come up to me afterwards in the coffee and tell me off that I'm all wrong, I don't mind. But this is what we've reviewed. We get swept away by the headlines, the jobs are being taken away by technology. Yes, they are, but there are still a lot of jobs to be left there. So my third observation, every government in the world frets about the efficacy of its education system. Every country. Rich countries have this very nice little group called the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. They share best practice on a whole series of things, including education systems. Finland, a small and perfectly formed country of 5 million, with a fantastically strong telecoms sector, despite the fact that Nokia has been completely destroyed by Korea, Japan, China, and good knows which other countries, is number 1 of that education league table produced by the OECD. And I swear, the Finns think they don't have a good education system. They worry that they'll be overtaken. They worry that the technology will move on. That's not to say you should be complacent, sir, and your colleagues in government and the state, but it is a fact of life. And it is the truism that, I now search for a truism, it is a truism that it is so important that you worry about it. But the systems themselves are not necessarily what you need to worry about. Education doesn't just come from the structures, it comes from society, it comes from the culture and the ethos of the people of your country. And I don't want you to go away and be complacent, but I will just make 2 or 3 observations as an outsider. That there is, yes, a fantastic challenge in that demographic deficit or dividend, or not deficit, democratic surplus or democratic dividend. So many jobs to be created for so many young people. But actually the market in India, the suppliers of education, is actually an incredibly dynamic place, certainly compared to Britain. I won't name any, I can't, I'm in front of all of you. But there are some incredibly dynamic young institutions in this city that are really beginning to challenge some of those slightly older, possibly founded over 70 years ago, institutions that are providing a dynamic education, that are teaching the skills that the young people and people even my age need to survive in this digital world. And they're actually producing enough of the high-grade coders, not just for India, but enough for America, enough for Britain, probably enough for most of the rest of Europe put together, to be quite honest. But education just isn't about the learning. The American theorists are 70, 20, 10. You learn 10 in the classroom, you learn 20 from direction of your manager or where it is in your workplace, and the 70% for doing. That is always being attacked as not being based on academic sound research, but it's certainly in largely British education cultures still pretty much accepted. You can have the brightest and best student with the 100% and the top A marks, but if they don't know how to work in the workplace, you are not going to have success. There's too much nodding. You're agreeing with me. I always want people to disagree with me when I say all these things. But yes, we do live in the age of Google and YouTube. All those how-to guides now exist on the internet. We don't necessarily need to have formal training or formal certificates, because yes, we can start up. And the fact that, sir, you've talked about startups, the fact you've talked about innovation, it is all happening in India. It is actually a moment of great, it could be the great leap forward moment. I'm not here today to say why it's holding you back or what's holding you back. I will just say on the education sphere, it is incredibly dynamic. But what you do want, this again is the British Council talking, and also my colleagues from the Department for International Development, who are working very closely with the central government on how we can help with the skills agenda, how we can help with the challenges of the 21st century and so on. But what you do want is that you want, I think, some assurance that the people that you get can do the things, that they know the how to. And this is a challenge for all of us, and this is actually the real challenge. You can get the classroom learning, but you've also got to have somewhere the classroom experimentation. How do I know that that wonderful cook that Dr. Bose has produced from his fantastic institute can actually do it in the kitchen? And that requires a certain amount of assessment, a major amount of assessment for some trades on actual work done. The experimentation of the worker before they get to the workplace. That is not cheap. Scaling up that education, as my colleagues in DFID tell me, is incredibly difficult. And for all the aspirations that my government have to help your government give the skills training to the 400 million people by 2023, it is an incredibly challenging task for anybody. So, oh, private sector in India, you always have been the most important element of the education system, to be frank. And I'm not talking even colonial legacies. You can come back to me on that separately. But the private sector has always been the most dynamic part of the education system. It is, in my brief anecdotal experience, still very dynamic. Go forth, challenge me on my assertions, but produce people for the traditional crafts, for the traditional jobs. Produce people who know how to get up in the morning and go to work. And produce people, above all, this is the final payoff line, who speak English. The biggest, saddest decision, as I get very political, of the 35 years of communist rule of this state was to take English out of the curriculum at that young age. The skill that you have in English, the employability that you have, is so important in the modern age when so much of the material of learning online is in English. Technology is coming to replace English, to replace language, but it still doesn't work very well. If we go on holiday in Japan, as I've just done, and I use Google Translate to get me from Tokyo to Kyoto on the bullet train when I've actually gone into the wrong station, it does take a very long time to work. So the skills that we need collectively, I think, still include English, perhaps only for the next 10 or the next 20 years. But to be able to communicate and hold down the job and to deliver value for you is what you want for your employers or for those you employ people. So I hope that's enough disruption, disruptive thinking, grist to everyone's thoughts. Thank you very much for listening to me. Good luck, and keep innovating in your education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bucknell, for providing such a global perspective on education. May I now request Dr. Professor Rajan Saxena, Vice Chancellor, MNIM IMS, to kindly come and address us.
The Chair of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, the Chairman of AICTE, and my fellow colleagues on the podium today. Let me at the outset thank the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for inviting me today to talk on the millennial learning and the education strategies, the learning and education strategies for the next generation. We just listened to the two wonderful presentations. One was from the chairman of the AICTE, who really outlined the kind of disruptive changes today that are taking place in the education policy itself and today in the country, whether this has been in the area of the graded autonomy regulations of the UGC, which gave to many of us in the university the desired autonomy that we had been talking about. And so that, to that extent, I would say it's been a wonderful kind of a move that the government of India had really taken. That's been one of the disruptive thinking. At the same time, in terms of the Gyan and the imprint kind of policy initiatives of the government. Well, having said that, and also listening to the kind of talk that the Deputy High Commissioner just mentioned about the kind of disruption and the kind of skills that we are talking about, puts me into a very interesting kind of puts before me some very, very interesting kind of issues today in higher education, especially when we look at the new student, the new young generation of students who are today coming over to the universities, to the higher education institutions itself. So what I'm going to be talking is really from the perspective of more of an educator and more of somebody who's leading the universities. So from a university side and also from the perspective of looking at the education industry per se, what are the kind of challenges that we really have today? Clearly, we today have the four major challenges of which the chairman AICTE did talk about in the country in terms of the quality of education, the employability issue, the access and the inclusiveness of education itself. But today when I look at and go beyond and take a look at the kind of generation that we have today, plus at the same time the technology, look at the interplay of technology with the demography and the economic sector itself, and one finds that there are very, very interesting kind of challenges emerging, very, very interesting challenges. And from that kind of a perspective, sometime back, or last year only, at FICCI, we had looked at education not from the conventional perspective, but looking at education 4.0. Today, industry is talking about Industry 4.0, education is also has to be moving towards a 4.0. And let me just quickly talk about what is that, the various stages that we talk about. Education 1.0 was all about the Gurukul system that, of which we have all been familiar with. The education 2.0 was where we really, it was a mass education. So the universities were established, the programs were built, the students came in, enrolled for the purposes of the value of the degree that they got, the perceived value of that degree. And after some point of time, clearly we did see that there was a disappointment among the people from the degree that they had, because it didn't really provide them that kind of an employment. It didn't really help them to live the life that they really wanted it. It didn't really help them to improve their standards of living. And clearly, from that kind of a perspective, there was yet another kind of the internet came in as a very big kind of a relief, I would put it across, in the world of education itself. The internet and the application of technology really brought in something called as the technology-enabled education, and so therefore, the education 3.0. Today, what we are seeing in a large number of institutions is something of that kind, where today, typically, technology is getting blended with the classroom learning itself. Whether we are talking about the MOOCs coming in and MOOCs getting integrated with education, with the classroom per se, or it is, for that matter, let us say, even bringing in some of the other kind of social media itself, let us say the mobile, the SMAC, the social media that we are talking about. Clearly, the integration of technology today in education has got us into education 3.0. But if you still look at it from the perspective of technology-enabled education, still it is the it is still teacher-centric. The teacher develops the product, has built the product, has created a course. It is for the student to really come in and pick up the course depending on whether he finds the value in it or not. But where is the student in it? Where is the learner in it? Can we think of creating an education where the learner is right at the center itself? To look at it from the perspective of what kind of an education model would really be that? Let me just spend some little time talking about it as I really go forward in terms of what I really mean by education 4.0. Now, why we are saying that is also because of the fact that today, if you look at your student profiles, and very interestingly, a big change which has occurred today is that conventionally, say, a generation of mine and all our generations, we went straight from the school to the university. We spent a very large time in acquiring our educations and then went to work. So if you were to look at it, a very large component of our lifetime we have spent in acquiring the education, and a very little time when it comes to the education the work itself. Today, the entire model is changing. Worldwide, today you find this kind of a change occurring, where students would want to break their education with work. So therefore, the model which is coming up is education, say maybe up to the high school level or up to the school level, work, or up to the graduation degree level, learn, then work, and then come back again to the education, and then again go back to work. That means, in other words, this kind of a system whereby the learning and work has to go hand in hand is something which we are really facing it today. We find that, and consequently today what we have is absolutely a new breed of students who are coming in. There are students who come with a work experience, students who come over after working for the industry. They would have worked in a large number of IT firms or for that matter, let us say the financial services firms, etc., or in any of the kind of organizations that are there. They would come, acquire the degree, go back again to work, and then come back again for a specialized kind of a degree itself, or for a specialized kind of a master's itself. So this kind of a perspective which is coming in today, the education system has to necessarily now change. And therefore we have to create those kinds of multiple exit and entry options in our education systems per se. And fortunately, there is some little kind of a thinking that is there that we do realize coming in even at the government level when they are talking about it from the perspective of integrating with the diploma education with the degree level kind of an education. But the point that I'm really trying to bring it out over here is that we have today a whole lot of non-conventional students coming in. These are entrepreneurs who come in. These are people who come in for the work experience. These are young girls, young women who, after getting married and after having, after the children have gone to the schools, they want to come back again, acquire a higher level of an education, and then go to work. So this is a different kind of a world that we are talking about it. And so therefore, from that kind of a perspective, we got to look at it that is it only the classroom? Is it only the university that can really provide that kind of an education? What is the value of a degree today? What is the value of my diploma today? Today, the fact of the matter is that this particular student can learn from multiple sources itself. It isn't just merely from one kind of a source. The information is flowing today in a real time, and therefore the information is available to the student, to every individual in the real time, in a both synchronous and an asynchronous manner. Now, if the student has a multiple sources of, or if the student has an access to a multiple sources of learning, and can learn not just merely from the student, from the teacher, but can also learn from others who are participating in that kind of a program, then the learning models that we are talking about has to necessarily take that in when we are into consideration, when we are really talking about developing our strategies itself. As I said, today a very serious question that is there, that is coming up, is with regard to the value of the degree or the diploma that we are today awarding. That gets reflected in a large number of surveys that are done on employment, on employability. When, for example, the various studies say that a high proportion of engineers and management graduates are not employable, and today you find that many engineering colleges, many of the technical institutions have a declining trend in admissions. A question that we need to ask ourselves, why is it happening? Is it just because that the job opportunities have ceased to exist? On the contrary, and I'll come back just in a minute for that. Many a time when we talk about the skilling, we refer to a very low-level kinds of skills. The fact is that there are still high-order level of skilled jobs which are still available, but there are no graduates available over there. So now how does the student really acquire those kinds of high level of skills? How does the student acquire some of those complex skills or the higher level of cognitive knowledge or the knowledge which he wouldn't have got it in the classroom itself? And today, clearly, there are very different kinds of education concepts that are emerging. These are education programs that are being offered by industry today. They are certifying them. There are a whole lot of an online education which awards you with the various kinds of, let's say, the reward points, the kind of the stars that the student earns. And the student just mentions that. So therefore, the various reward points, industry authenticated certificates, symbols, graded level of learning, level 1, level 2, level 3, reflecting the kind of level of learning that the person has had in a particular subject itself. And so therefore, from the perspective of what we call it as credentialing, what we call it as assessment, let's take a fresh look at it. Because today what the student is saying is, I don't necessarily have to get your degree. He tells me that I don't necessarily have to have only an MIMS degree. I need to have something much more to that. And so therefore, what is it that the NMIMS has to do? Or what is it that any of the institution, IIT or IIM, have to do? And almost every one of us are today talking about it. Let me just give you a very interesting kind of a data point to further substantiate what I'm really saying, that if we want to look at today this education technology market, today the EdTech market has been estimated to be $94 billion by 2020. And India is to grow from 247 million in 2015 to almost about $1,960 million by 2021. So the EdTech market per se, education technologies market per se, which is changed, which is altering this entire kind of an education spectrum per se, is today is going to be expanding in a very big way. And largely because of the fact that the student feels empowered. In the conventional model, the student doesn't feel empowered. The student has to come to the class. Why? Either because of your attendance rules or because of some kind of a pressure. But it is not necessarily that the student is getting that kind of a value in learning itself or in the class itself. So this kind of a growth which is going to be there in this education technology is largely due to the fact that the new course material is far more engaging. There are more innovative delivery models that are coming up. And it isn't just merely something like a MOOC where a teacher created a product and left it on the online platform for the student to subscribe. Here are the models in which there is a teacher, there is an assisted learning which is coming in. So therefore, from all these angles, clearly the EdTech market is expected to grow. The Deputy High Commissioner talked about the disruption, the disruptive changes, and even the chairman talked about it. Well, we are all familiar with the disruptive technologies of the 21st century. From a learning perspective, I think it is the SMAC, that is the social media, the mobile internet, analytics, and the cloud technology, which have today created a different kind of a environment per se. It is this SMAC which today will usher Education 4.0. Because now the student can select a course. Now the student is able to say, this is the kind of a length to which I will today study and acquire my level of certification and go to work. I don't have to sit for the entire ultimate level of acquiring the diploma. So I can grade it, I can phase it out, I can make it far more convenient to myself. And therefore, from that kind of a perspective, the SMAC today and Education 4.0 today empowers learner to structure his or her path, keeping in mind his final outcome. So if I want to let us say, acquire some certifications in the area of project management, or if I want to acquire some certifications in the area of, let us say, even cloud computing, I could possibly go and acquire the necessary kind of certification and the level of knowledge itself. The impact on education of this is very simple, that education is not just going to be merely restricted to the classroom itself. It is not just merely going to get restricted, or it is not just merely restricted to the timelines that we are talking about it, say a 10 to 5 or a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 9 kind of thing. It is a 24/7 education model. And with the blended learning and flexible learning models, clearly we are moving towards a situation in which we are talking about a competency-based education model itself. Now, the competency-based education model is important because if we were to look at the 21st century skills, and I'm more talking about not the lower end kind of skills. I'm not talking about a plumbing skills. I'm not talking about an electrician kind of a skills. I'm not talking about those kinds of skill sets of which many a time, whenever we talk about the skills, the discussion get veered to that. I'm talking about the skills of complex problem solving, which is extremely difficult, which is extremely important. Today, the industry problems are not simple problems. You would find there's an interplay of regulation, technology, media, and at the same time, you may even find the interplay of the demography in that kind of a problem that the industry would be having. So the complexity of the problems today, and therefore the expectation is that the graduates should be able to solve these problems, require the very different kinds of skill sets. Working with algorithms, for example, is a very different kind of a skill set. Critical thinking, for example, is an important kind of a skill set. Creativity, people management, coordination and collaboration with others, judgment and decision making. There's a whole lot of data today that the machine throws up. Today the data is not something which gives you that advantage. The data is there. But then what is important is decision making. Do you really have that kind of a skill set to take that kind of a decision making skills? And finally, it is the negotiating skills that are there. And so therefore, from this kind of a point of view, what I believe is that the new millennium learning strategies require us to create learning practices, human support and physical environments that will support the teaching and learning in a manner in which the student acquires the necessary competencies. The student is able to deliver the kind of results for which the education which he's getting really gives him that kind of a part of it. It enables the students to learn in relevant real-world 21st century context itself and allows equitable access to quality learning tools, technologies, and resources. And therefore, from that kind of a point of view, it is one where it requires a blended learning strategies per se. And so therefore, as I conclude, let me put it across like this, that the new model of education which is there for us all to consider requires not just merely the industry support, but it also requires us to look at creating flexible models of learning. It requires us to think in terms of not boxes per se, say boxes of science or humanities or social sciences, but to go beyond. So therefore, think of education, think of knowledge in a borderless kind of an environment. The borders not being defined by any of the discipline per se. Collaborative forms of learning, technology-enabled learning, inclusive education, innovation, entrepreneurship, experiential, and keeping the student right at the core are some of the key components. And so therefore, before I conclude, let me mention why I talk about today a borderless education is largely because of the fact that if you were to think of the conventional, scientists and teachers, etc., that we have talked about, Aristotle or Socrates or let's say even Einstein or any of them, they wouldn't define a problem in a particular kind of a discipline or in a particular order per se. And so therefore, from this kind of a point of view, as somebody said very clearly, that the earliest scientists were polymaths who studied and described the world they lived in without lumping their description into any particular discipline. What today we require is opening up of our minds and creating such kind of flexible learning models in which the student is able to learn from multiple sources, acquire the skills which are required for Industry 4.0 and for the world, which is a technology-enabled kind of a world. Thank you very much for giving me this kind of a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Professor Saxena, for this insight on Education 4.0. Now may I request Ms. Leonie Muldoon, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, Australian Trade and Investment Commission, New Delhi, to please come and address us, ma'am.
Thank you for that introduction, fellow panelists. Let me start by thanking the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for inviting me to speak here today on this very topical area focused on millennial learning. I'm very keen to share with you some Australian experiences and add to some of the broader high-level concepts that we've been hearing about this morning. The way that we all live and learn and work is changing very rapidly. New economic conditions, technological developments, they're all combining to disrupt enterprises and to create some new business opportunities, many in very unexpected places and ways. We're seeing whole sectors revolutionise. We're seeing some jobs completely disappear. My grandchildren unashamedly told me that I was lucky that I had moved away from being a lawyer, because lawyers were to be extinct. They were the dinosaurs of this generation. There would be no legal jobs anymore, and they were happy that Grandma had found something else to do. But the way that things are changing creates a very big challenge in the education sphere, both in regard to the content, what we teach, and the manner of teaching. And because things continue to change, it's a big challenge for us to ensure that education keeps pace with those changes. Layered over the top of that again, we have the aspirations and we have the lifestyles of young people that are also changing considerably, and they'll continue to change. I think of the life that my husband and I led through our education and throughout our careers, and the lives that my children and my grandchildren are leading. These are vastly different. They have many career changes. They look for very flexible, lifelong education options. This is a very different world to the world that catered for my needs when I was growing up and I was seeking career options. The millennials, of course, are the only generation that have never lived without a technology gadget in their hands. For millennials, technology isn't just a sort of an accessory or things that we check to communicate or pick up messages. It's a complete way of life. And it's something that is not static either. While the early millennials or the Gen Ys had PCs and cell phones and video games, the later millennials or the Gen Zs, they're all about tablets and smartphones and apps. So these things are all continuing to shift, and that means that the entire education ecosystem, from early learning through to higher education and lifelong learning, also needs to continue to adjust and change. It's a vast, and you've heard already this morning, it's a very challenging canvas. And I'd like to just perhaps restrict my thoughts to narrow areas of organisational learning, skills training, and higher education. But I wanted to start by perhaps just going up to some higher level trends, a bit of a backdrop to the challenge that educators are facing as they prepare students to usefully participate in this new world. And as part and parcel of that, I just wanted to bring to the fore 6 future social, economic and environmental megatrends that our own Australian research body, CSIRO, have identified as impacting in this next 10-year period. So in no particular order, the things that they highlighted that we should be paying attention to, both in terms of education, but also industry and the bureaucracy. We're trying to more from less, efficient use of water, food and energy, planetary pushback, changes that we're seeing to the Earth systems, biological agriculture and climate systems, what they described as forever young. We're all living longer, and the impact of this ageing population is significant in terms of the workforce asset and also healthcare costs. Digital immersion, obviously an increasing connected world in terms of information, data and technology. Porous boundaries, we're moving towards a world that doesn't have meaningful boundaries anymore. We're seeing digital transformation that really puts us into a global economy and that reshapes government, employment and companies and the way that we operate. We're seeing the peer-to-peer or the sharing economy emerge, where all of our own personal assets, my car, my home, these are suddenly core assets for new businesses to emerge. Capital, I spent some time as an investment banker, and during that time I worked with startups. I was on the private equity side of the business, and people who had ideas came to me looking for capital. And now I see that people who have ideas and who have businesses that they're moving forward globally really don't need capital anymore. They need a whole range of other assets to take their business forward. And finally, great expectations. As populations grow wealthier, they demand a rise in services and experience, and that's particularly evident with the youth demographic. So all these trends put tremendous pressure on education providers to reshape the education experience. Australian education has become one of the most sought after in the world. We welcome an enormous number of Indian graduates every year to our shores. And Australian and Indian, in fact, families globally want to give their children the best possible education, and students themselves are becoming increasingly demanding about the skills that they require education institutions to bring to them so that they can prosper in this very competitive global environment. So Australian universities talk a lot about what they call developing T-shaped graduates. So students that have expertise in a particular technical area, that vertical base if you like, but then have broad adaptive horizontal skills, life skills if you like, that are around change management, out-of-the-box thinking, cross-disciplinary reach. These are the adaptive skills that will enable students to really evolve as the world changes and meet career demands into the future. We see this important horizontal layer as going forward probably as important or more important than that core vertical key skill base. So some education trends that we're seeing in Australia that work within or with these 6 global mega trends identified before, and also are part of us striving to deliver these T-shaped graduates that leverage digital innovation and change organisational learning and skill change. Starting with gamification, the process of taking something that already exists, it might be a website or a learning module, and applying some game elements and digital game design techniques so that participation is much more motivated, we see stronger engagement, stronger loyalty. Students are taking things in, they're not hearing about them, they're participating in them. Social learning tools, elements of the social media channels that really put a context and within a single organisation allow team members to really share, collaborate, work on content in new ways. This has been identified in many of our Australian companies as a very effective method of augmenting the results of formal training and learning, but also driving collaboration and innovation within companies. Micro-learning, the delivery of very short, fast learning modules that take maybe less than 5 minutes to complete, so that people get the information that they need when they need it. These can be hosted on internal portals, or many of our government 5-minute courses are simply hosted on YouTube, and people are encouraged to pick things up as they're waiting for the bus or just about to jump on the train. Get a little burst that starts some thinking, some learning, changes the way that people engage in this lifelong learning process. Mobile learning, of course, everything today is about smartphones. So there are opportunities for students and employees to learn what they want, wherever they are. And learning personalisation. We have a tremendous opportunity in this day and age to use digital technology such as social media and put them together with data analytics that enable us to really personalise learning and development programs and customise things to individual career goals and aspirations within the specific context of the organisation. Come for a moment to the higher education piece. Some of the things that are being embraced by the Australian higher education sector, and I know are being embraced here in India as well. Clearly, online learning. Online offerings are already serving as an extended part of student coursework. So mobility, connectivity are really a critical and core part of any student course undertaken in Australia now. Video-based learning, all of our lectures from our higher education institutions are videoed. Students can attend, be part of the experience with other students and lecturers, but equally they can pick up the video directly and listen to the lecture at a time convenient to them. Engage back with the lecturer through WhatsApp, question them online, etc. Augmentation and virtual reality, technologies we're using to produce computer-generated scenarios that simulate, elaborate, put learning into realistic experiences, real-life scenarios, get students not only hearing about things, but in a virtual reality context, actually working with them in real time. Data analytics and big data, mining these large data sets to get a better understanding of where and how students are actually learning, what's working and what's not working, and using that to just improve the overall course delivery and content, but also to create modules that are personalised to individual student groups and particular student needs. And of course, just broadly, the Internet of Things. It's an evolving and fantastic tool, which is such a terrific platform for us to be continually innovating in terms of the education ecosystem. And it would be remiss of me not to mention cross-disciplinary science. We in Australia, and I know in the UK as well, and here in India, have a very big focus on STEM subjects, particularly in regard to women and increasing female participation in the STEM area. But the thing that we're really looking to add to that is to make sure that when students engage in STEM subjects, they're also doing cross-disciplinary sciences. So they're participating in a combination of biotechnology, material science, nanotechnology, ICT, cognitive science. Putting things together and making more sense of how they attack problem solving and innovation. So let me conclude by just highlighting perhaps a few practical examples that I've seen firsthand in the Australian sort of skills, school education, higher education areas. First of all, we have Australian industry and skills committees. Historically, industry got together with our skills ecosystem in Australia to develop courses that were meaningful for industry, that were more practical, that were around plumbers and engineers, etc., etc. But today, these vocational education and training systems, which have been set up across 8 sectoral project areas. So here we're putting industry and the education skills ecosystem together to look at what does industry need from future graduates in areas like big data, automation, coding, consumer engagement in social media, cybersecurity, environmental sustainability, and teamwork and communication. So putting that really important partnership of industry and the education sector together, but working to solve some of this next generation challenge. Second example is a challenge that we face, and I know is shared here in India in regard to rural education. We have a very big country and we have a lot of rural communities that in and of themselves do not have a population to support the level of higher education institution that we would like to be able to make available to our students and our citizens. So the Australian Government's higher education reform package, which is designed to be more responsive to the aspirations of students and the needs of industry for their future workforce, has developed 8 community-owned regional or rural study hubs. So there we're allowing regional students to study courses that are delivered locally by distance from our top Australian universities, and that are providing greater access to not only study but a whole range of infrastructural support. What we're doing is, I guess, recognising that there are students who quite rightly aspire to the highest levels of higher education but wish to remain locally based with their families in their communities, and recognising that they deserve the same education opportunities as our city-based students. We have the technology. It exists in Australia, it exists here in India. We can deliver that education opportunity to our rural-based students in the same way. And my third example is a little bit closer to home. So our own Australian Trade and Investment Commission is turning digital and social. We run a digital school video competition where we invite school students in India to demonstrate their advanced English language skills and creativity to create a very short 3-minute video on careers of the future. So our participating Australian universities come up each year with some future careers where they see emerging opportunities for future employment, and they invite Indian students to tell them what they think about those opportunities and those careers. This year we had over 540 schools across South Asia participating and engaging with online content. I guess more importantly and quite revealing for us, the competition was wholly launched online, and we had 330,000 Facebook clicks, and we had a click-through rate, interest from students, that was 4 times the Facebook average. Indian students are interested in what the future for them looks like, what careers are available, and they're investigating those. As part of the competition, our universities developed some videos that talked a little bit about these careers of the future and also talked about filmmaking. The rate at which Indian students downloaded those videos, took them to heart and brought them back in some fantastic online content was quite remarkable. The winning schools and students, 2 students and a teacher from each of the winning institutions was supported in a study trip to Australia to visit the supporting university and to engage in courses associated with the career of the future that they had selected. This embracing of technology, new ways of learning, looking ahead to what it might mean for students' future career is happening in Australia, is happening in India. Students are already leading the way. They're showing us how and where they learn and what their career ambitions are in the future. We just need to kind of run and keep up, if you like. But these rapid advances in technology and changes in lifestyles and aspirations, they're driving a tremendous need for change and reform in the education process, and a need for us to align with that and make sure that we are supporting our students to really position themselves to be the best possible future workforce, an inspired, a motivated and engaged workforce. Many of the ideas, the trends, the areas of focus and priority that we're working with in Australia, I know the UK are working with, are very relevant here in India as well. And the Australian Trade and Investment Commission would be very happy to assist any members here today that want to explore some of those collaboration opportunities with Australian education providers. Thank you for your time. It's already been quite an inspiring session with a lot of new ideas coming to the fore. I look forward to further discussion and some very interesting ideas and engagement around millennial learning. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Muldoon, for your wonderful insight on Australian education. May I now request Dr. Ashok Thakur, Chief Mentor and Advisor, Sister Nivedita University, to kindly come and address us.
Good afternoon. We have really extended this time schedule, so I'll be brief. At the outset, I must thank the BCCI for giving me an opportunity of addressing this august audience with some of the most distinguished persons in the field of education addressing us from the podium. Now, I am currently affiliated to a university named after Sister Nivedita, born Margaret Noble. The rationale, if you seek, she, even in that late half of the 19th century, was deeply involved in educating the children, and she was ready to embrace new education, including the concept of kindergarten introduced by her in Kingsley, around the time Froebel and others were coming up with the idea. And this involved moving away from the standard learning by rote, the 3R system, into play and activity. The other thing with which she was absolutely passionate about was the freedom movement, the home rule. And when she met Swamiji and was christened Sister Nivedita, she had already been rather disillusioned with a structured religious city of Christianity. So she was ready to embrace the kind of expansive philosophy that Swamiji's discourse could offer her the liberty. She moved into India, and there she continued in that vein because she kept her relationship with the freedom fighters of the day in Anushilan Samiti, as well as guided and befriended one of the most startling scientists of the day, Jagdish Chandra Bose. But she also kind of provided the guidance to Abanindranath so that he and his disciples could go to Ajanta to bring back the concept of the Indian cultural activity in the world of painting. This kind of shows the broad canvas on which she figured out how education should be treated. Now, we have already heard from very distinguished speakers about what does modern university mean. Now, and how is it related to the demands of the society? How we quite often lament that the education that we provide does not always produce students who are ready to take up the challenges of the university. I have a couple of points to make. I'll be very brief. The first is, it has already been mentioned that you can get into a more asynchronous mode of teaching. And it has already been mentioned by Professor Saxena quite successfully that when you implement that, how does it comply with the attendance requirement? Is it breaking the discipline? If you want to extend the classroom and yet demand that the students be present there, are you not moving into a dichotomy, a conflict in ideas? I think we need to address that seriously, and that perhaps needs to go to the regulators. Because it's the regulators who quite often maintain the old kind of habit of continuing with regulations which might be in conflict with the new demands of making sure that the accessibility and the reach can really go out. We are talking about reaching out to a larger segment. Can we free that dependence on the so-called discipline? Somewhere there is a concept that the discipline and the freedom, they are juxtaposed to each other, which Sister Nivedita always fought. And I think we in our university would like to create that freedom a practical point. Like there is this current concept of choice-based credit system. I'll refer to that in a minute. You will see that quite often the syllabus that is described is given in terms of marks. This is an archaic system which we have adopted since Calcutta University and Bombay University and Madras was founded in 1857. The world has moved on. The credit reflects the number of hours of teaching. Marks reflect nothing. It's a scale which is adopted for trying to evaluate students. And yet we try to define the credit in terms of the marks that it goes by. The second concept which I quite often find is not clearly grasped is the grading system. We still would love to have the marks as reflected in a grade because we are afraid to have, say, 5 students getting A, because then in our mindset, we try asking question, who is the best? And we get stuck there. But the entire point of giving grades is to evaluate a student individually rather than in competition with each other. Now, we define excellence more as a competition. Good, better, excellent. But there is a different way of defining excellence. You can always think of knowing your limitations and overcoming that what constitutes excellence. And when you do that, then you would find that you don't need to have the marks to judge who stood first and who stood second. This is again what I call my alma mater, Calcutta University's contribution, that first class first syndrome. You know, in this Kolkata, we quite often hear that person is good because why he stood first class first throughout his life. No one talks about what he did last month or last year. But that is what education is all about. We are talking about learning throughout lifetime. But then, how does that learning not get enriched when you give the students the choice of deciding what they are going to study? The choice comes from there. You see, we have created the discipline quite often, as one of my colleagues used to say, nature doesn't understand the distinction between a physics and a chemistry. It is we with our limitations have tried to define the subjects that way so that we feel comfortable. It is our limitation. But when I want my student to become creative, thinking fresh, thinking laterally, bringing in discipline, I would love them to participate in different classes. And a class of music, and a class of philosophy, while he is doing a course in computer science or statistics. Because as he imbibes these things, he begins to understand that education is all about getting a holistic view rather than a narrowed down view of a particular discipline. I sometimes have a problem in teaching an exact technology which is demanded by the industry at that time, because unfortunately, not only with the disruption of technology, there is a volatility to it. So by the time the student comes out, that technology might be obsolete. So what is primarily of essence is to teach them how to learn rather than trying to teach them a syllabus. But whenever I talk to my younger colleagues, that your job is not to cover the syllabus, but only to uncover a portion of it, so that the students know how to cover their syllabus. This is not my quote. This is the quote of Professor Kelkar, who was the first director of IIT Kanpur. But you know, again and again we come back to the same kind of feeling by these teachers that they need to cover the syllabus. They need to regurgitate. And unfortunately, some of the regulation that demands of us, that's demanded of us, perhaps pushes us to that. That is one thing, and other, of course, is the comfort zone from which you don't want to move out. But I think in this new millennium, if we have to break through these barriers, we have to start implementing this. We have to give the students the freedom. Again, this is not my word. Alexander von Humboldt had been talking about this kind of concept of a university, how the society needs to build the university in order to develop. And this has been quoted by Chomsky in his For Reasons of State, where there is an extensive chapter on that. We all read that. But in actuating that in a university curriculum into our academic calendar, we quite often feel shy of. I'm sure this is the kind of disruptive talk that you are listening to. And perhaps before the next actual technical session where we can hear experts deliver on it, can expand on it. But my brief intervention in this deliberation would be that while we need our intelligent young next generation to be technically competent enough to get into the new society's requirement, the only way they can try to go on doing that if they learn how to learn, and this would enable them to shift from one technology to the other when the time comes. Otherwise, you would get obsolescence again and again. You would get a society in ferment where there would be a large segment increasingly feel outdated, rejected, rather than being a participant in the building up a new society, a new India for me. With these words, I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Thakur, for the fresh and disruptive insights. May I now request Mr. Shotyam Roy Chaudhary, Vice Chairman, Education Committee, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to deliver the closing remark.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We come to the end of the inaugural session, and it is indeed a pleasure for me to conclude this session. We are immensely grateful to all the speakers who have kindly join us despite their busy schedule. I must thank Dr. Anil Sahasrabudhe, our Chairman, All India Council for Technical Education. Thank you, sir, for your kind presence. I must thank Dr. Bruce Becknell, British Deputy High Commissioner of Calcutta. Thank you, sir. Dr. Ranjan Saxena, Vice Chancellor, NMI-MS. Thank you, sir, for your kind presence. Ms. Leonie Muldun, thank you, madam, and Dr. Ashok Thakur. And we are also grateful to all our sponsors, participants, media friends, and all the invitees here from academia and institutions, and all the stakeholders. From the learned speakers, it is very clear there is an urgent need for expanding accessibility, affordability, and quality of education at all levels of our society. Society is changing more rapidly than ever before, and so its technology, generating unprecedented opportunities and challenges in this wake. In this context, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, Bengal Chamber of Education Committee has endeavored to create the vision of higher education in India. This session has focused on the value-based excellence in education, which will be leading to innovation, employment, and entrepreneurship. We will also listen to various leaders in this sector at the upcoming session. Thanking you all.
Thank you, sir. We have a very pleasant task to perform now. May I request Mr. Indrajit Sen to kindly present mementos to Dr. Anil Sahasrabudhe. To Mr. Bruce Bucknell, British Deputy High Commissioner, Kolkata. Dr. Professor Rajan Saxena, Vice Chancellor, NMI-MS. Ms. Leonie Muldoon, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, Australian Trade and Investment Commission, New Delhi. And to Dr. Ashok Thakur, Chief Mentor and Advisor, Sister Nivedita University. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. With this, Upon the request of our photographer friends, can we have a group photo on the dais? As the photograph is being taken, we have a small announcement. We request you all to be with us till the evening session. We have a very special session, which is the felicitation of a very, very special guest. And it's mentioned in the program schedule. So she is our icon of the day. She is our guest of honor, Srimati Arundhati Bhattacharya, former chairperson, the State Bank of India. We have Jimmy Tangri, who is an eminent radio personality, and we have a lot of chat coming up with the former chairperson of the State Bank of India. So please stay with us, and it will be followed by dinner. So kindly be with us till the end of the program. With this, we move on to our next session, and Dr. Subarno Bush, he'll take it forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are running a little behind schedule, but our first leader speak coming up in a few minutes from now. Can we have the sofas and the tables off the stage, please?